If Americans don't wake up soon, the country will be turned over to Luciferians. Destruction is coming upon America. This is not a theory, this is simple reality based upon all of that's happening right now around all of us. If you take a critical and close look at what's happening in America, just following the dots, you will soon discover that events everywhere are screaming out that destruction and terror are about to fall like a nuclear bomb upon our land. All of the signs of an impending socialist takeover are clearly in place. Every move that our government is making telegraph the fact that the United States of America will soon be transformed into some kind of socialist state of America. All those who are running this governmental administration are working behind the scenes at breakneck speed to prepare the country for martial law with the forced military takeover of America. They are already programming us to accept and obey his brand of dictatorial government. Those trusting souls who shrug off all these obvious warning signs and who believe everything they're being told by the authorities will more than likely be the first ones to die when a Holocaust sweeps our land. It doesn't take a prophet to see that the final days of the United States are here. And the end of our great nation will likely be very bloody. The U.S. government of lies, the extent of U.S. governmental corruption defies the imagination. From top to bottom, this regime is like a walking corpse, a civil servant zombie that refuses to die or go away. The U.S. government's philosophy and actions are so hypocritical, so self-righteous and so perverse that moral and decent Americans should rise up in intense anger and kick all these usurpers and criminals out. They contribute nothing to America, instead they suck dry the lifeblood of our nation through endless taxes and a morass of worthless regulations designed to bind up the country. And right now, all of their actions are focused upon one main goal: the totalitarian takeover of our country. Now, how can we know this is their agenda? It's simple, really. The state lies about everything. They lie about the poisons they put in our drinking water, the toxic heavy metal cocktail they're spraying from our skies, which they have admitted is happening, the hidden GMOs they've approved for our foods, the mercury they've laced into our vaccinations. They lie about how costly their form of government is to run. They hide their true budget under creative math and the camouflaging of waste and utter inefficiency. They lie about how much they spy on us, how little they protect us, how often they abuse us, but most of all they lie about their real agenda. All their promises are lies, and we're fools for not holding them accountable. We should now question everything these governmental crooks say at every level. We need to realize that our government is like an iceberg of evil. And the lies that you can see are dwarfed by what's hidden within the bowels of its vast secret bureaucracy. Our government traffics in guns and drugs, supporting and using criminal drug cartels, paying informants and murderers, stealing from the crooks and the citizens alike. They blackmail and frame innocent Americans, ruin businesses, and profit on the backs of good honest people. When honest men attempt to reveal the corruption, this regime has sentenced those whistleblowers to 25 times the amount of punishment of all other U.S. presidents combined. Many of those threatening this government are simply murdered, and then those crimes are covered up as suicides by the local authorities under pressure from the FBI or other agencies. No crime is beyond these government tyrants. There is graft and corruption for all. Hillary Clinton admitted our state financed and armed Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. But what they're not telling you is that we're still financing many terror groups. Perform a little internet search on ISIS and its connection with the CIA and you'll discover that ISIS was spawned by our own Central Intelligence Agency. Now that's not a theory or a rumor. It's a fact. Follow the money and you'll find the truth. The U.S. finances terror. But you say, that defies logic. Why would our own CIA work to create an Islamic organization which openly targets the West and publicly beheads Christians? The answer is simple but also very disturbing. The 9/11 attack and what it really means. To fully understand, let's go back a few years. When the Cold War with the Soviet Union ended, the American banking and military-industrial complex faced major losses of revenue. They know the reality that peace is not terribly profitable, but war is immensely profitable. The globalists who controlled our government at the time Bush and company put together an unbelievably devious scheme to create their own designer war. It all began with a top-secret state-controlled mass media event, horrifying the American public with perfectly coordinated live TV coverage of people jumping from blazing buildings. Then while we all watched aghast in real time, those World Trade buildings defied the laws of physics and collapsed upon themselves because they were actually brought down by controlled demolitions, crushing thousands of office workers and firefighters. It defies logic that on September 11, 19 inept and undertrained terrorists could have defeated the defenses of the most powerful nation in the world, bringing us to our knees using box cutters? This is proved beyond a doubt by the fact that Building 7 of the WTC complex also imploded upon itself on the same day. That demolition would have been impossible unless explosives were already planted inside the building, ready to be detonated. So 9/11 was an incredibly effective public relations blitzkrieg against America. It was also obviously, if you critically examine all the facts, an inside job which was designed to launch a new and never-ending war on terror. I know, it's unconscionable to think that our OWN government could mount such an attack, killing up to 3,000 innocent Americans, but realize that this sort of false flag event has happened many times in history. If such a crime is big enough, most honest and moral people will not be able to grasp that your own government is responsible for the self-inflicted attack. In 1991, globalist mastermind David Rockefeller said, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the new world order." The sensationalized attacks of 9/11, with their iconic graphic images of destruction, so traumatized us that we were all too willing to let many of our freedoms be whisked away at the hands of our governmental keepers. After all, they promised that they would find those responsible and punish them for these horrendous deeds. So 9/11 ushered in the Department of Homeland Perpetual and Security, the TSA, which should stand for Taking Security Away, the Patriot Act, and so many other senseless draconian laws designed to cow Americans into blind obedience. The real purpose of the war on terror, the real purpose of this bogus war on terror, was to allow our government to grow bigger and more intrusive. And even though the administration that brought us 9/11 was Republican, that really doesn't matter. Because the globalists control both major political parties. And so they control our government and the direction it has been moving on for years. As an example, our own Central Intelligence Agency is being used since World War II to pit our enemies and our friends against each other so that they will be destabilized. Our spies don't exist to learn other countries' secrets to save us from hostile attacks. Instead, their primarily task is to be instability agents. The CIA uses its resources and agents to tear apart the social and economic fabric of other countries which our American regime wants to neutralize. This perverted logic is used to keep the world in turmoil so that Washington can play like we are the world's policemen, all the while as we beat down our foes. Many in the world have called America the Great Satan. That label is now a pretty accurate assessment of what our government has morphed into. The truth is, since WW2, America has traumatized the world. We've killed countless millions of civilians in endless foreign intrigues, coups, destabilization operations, with support for terrorist networks, and of course our own wars. Over the years we've also secretly exposed many populations to radiation, tested bioterrorism weapons, inoculated women with infertility drugs, experimented with GMOs, sending countries into famine, and assaulted the world with myriads of chemicals and heavy metals. All of this fits perfectly into the globalist agenda, which wants to create a new world order and reduce world population by 6 billion people. The coming death of the dollar, in both Fort Knox and in the vaults in New York. If you do the research, you'll discover that our gold is now gone. Our U.S. regime isn't even able to repatriate the gold we were once holding for other countries. It's been stolen. Our government also recently gave all our big banks a legislative free pass to speculate at will, meaning that Americans will be stuck with the tab when the next financial meltdown hits us. The Fed continues to print billions of worthless paper dollars banked by nothing but good faith, temporarily holding up the U.S. financial house of cards. When the crash is finally unleashed, you can be sure that it will make the Great Depression look like a dimple. Because the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency for the world, when that crash comes it will cause a worldwide panic, financial meltdown and food shortages that will be devastating. With the aftermath of that crash, millions will likely starve to death. You should realize that the dollar's destruction is already being planned. All of the inside traders will profit from this event at your expense. When this crash is unleashed, our regime will likely call a bank holiday when they will confiscate all bank accounts, security deposit boxes and retirement funds in one big move. Such a bank holiday will be sudden and unexpected by most Americans who will be financially ruined. No wonder they're trying to de-arm Americans. The coming martial law in American, but at the same time the globalists are trying to disarm Americans. The administration itself is arming every major department to the teeth. Most agencies now have their own SWAT teams, police forces and even tanks. Why would the administration purchase 6 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition? Why are there multitudes of empty FEMA camps complete with barbed wire, and fully staffed with armed guards and attack dogs? Why are multitudes of brand new weapons, including tanks, drones, emergency survival kits, and coffin liners being trucked all over the country? Why are huge secret underground fortress cities being built by the government all over the country? Why have we become a surveillance state with cameras, sophisticated car tracking equipment, and face recognition software being deployed everywhere? Why are there these mysterious data collection fusion centers all over the country? Why have so many local police forces now have given war-level military equipment from the Department of Defense? What is all of this in preparation for? All sorts of executive orders have already been signed by former President Obama covering every area of what will happen when a full or partial martial law is declared. Everything has been planned. While the government is not very efficient, you can be absolutely certain that the fundamental transformation of America which Obama promised right in the beginning is definitely coming soon. If you think otherwise, you're living in a dream. The globalists want to set up UN Agenda 21. In a nutshell, it's the New World Order as defined by Aldous Huxley in his book Brave New World to get people to love their servitude. But for us, it will be more like Orwell's 1984. These globalists believe that for their agenda to succeed, they will have to dramatically cut down on the number of people living within the U.S., especially all of those who are perceived as troublemakers: Christians, Jews, constitutionalists, and free market capitalists who will be impossible to retrain, so they will be euthanized. If you're in one of those categories, you'll be sent to a FEMA camp and re-educated, or they'll simply execute you. This is so hard to accept. Now I know this is all hard to accept. But to believe that this could really even be possible, you have to remember that it has already happened in recent history in Russia, China, the Eastern European countries, Vietnam and in North Korea. You must grasp the basic mentality behind all of this to grasp that those in power within the US are willing and able to do this same kind of a takeover in our country. Understand one word clearly, and that is psychopath. The vast majority of those in power truly are psychopaths. You won't comprehend how all of this can really be happening unless you realize that many of these people do not have a shred of conscience, morality or even the slightest sense of fair play. No crime is unthinkable to these people. They answer to no one because in their minds they are the law. And they believe that their view of reality is in the best interests of our planet. And following right behind them, implementing all their vengeance, will be an army of toadies who will obey whatever they are ordered to do, knowing of course that to disobey means they would face the wrath of Big Brother. You can forget about any false hope you might have that the next presidential election will save America. Elections now are merely a distraction that are allowed to keep Americans busy thinking that they still mean anything. In 2014, the American people spoke loudly about their view of the White House's agenda, and Obama's candidates were trounced at the polls. But what impact did any of that have? Virtually none. The end of America, through a progressive socialist takeover, is now way too far along for there to be any political solution to hold it off. Even riots in the street are unlikely to stop this juggernaut of terror. Remember, the government has all the weapons. If Americans everywhere simply decided to withhold their support for the government, stopped paying their taxes or only paid them slowly, it would surely impact Washington. Certainly, if 50 million Americans were to slow down their obedience and begin to resist the current regime, that could make a difference. But keep in mind that these psychopaths simply don't care if 150 million Americans die while they inflict their vision of a progressive socialist agenda upon the country. They are fully ready to sacrifice the lives of all those they see as troublemakers. They've already designed Christians, Jews and constitutionalists as terrorists, believe it or not. Morally, they're fully capable and willing and actually anxious to eliminate all of those who stand in their way. This is part of their long-standing philosophy and beliefs as progressive socialists. It's all been clearly spelled out in their books and now also in their methodical actions. If you doubt this, check out the movie The Agenda: Grinding American Down. I personally lived through the events talked about in that film. I once owned almost all of the original source materials that the film talks about, having read most of them and followed these changes over that last 50 years. We have a spiritual problem. There is no doubt that these socialists are going to slaughter all Christians, Jews and freedom-loving people in our country using whatever means necessary. And they'll likely use tactical nuclear weapons or even nuke whole American cities in order to bring us to their knees. Of course, like 9/11, they'll turn those actions into false flag events and blame them on domestic terrorists in order to give justification for martial law and smashing down the country. Unfortunately, right now, most Americans don't have a clue what's coming. And if they do actually see the dark clouds building up on the horizon, they're still not stressed enough by the current situation within our country or alarmed enough that they are ready to actually attempt to try to do anything about it. I firmly believe that America's problem is spiritual in nature. Our government has grown out of control because we let it. We are the ones who let our country turn away from morality and God. Sure, these changes have all happened gradually over a period of time. Most of us didn't notice what was happening because it has happened so slowly, but we've all been too preoccupied with our own lives and our own problems to see it coming. And so, because this is our country, we have to bear responsibility for what our nation and our government has become. In the past, America was one of the strongest Christian nations in the world. But that's all changed now. Overnight we've become the leader to import our brand of evil on the world. And because of all this, I firmly believe nothing short of a massive spiritual awakening can save America. The enemy is not at the gates. The enemy is inside the gates. Worse, he is already on the seat of power. And as long as we continue to be lethargic or ignore the dangers until they explode into open conflict, nothing will change. The enemy is highly organized. He has a plan and he has the money and he has all the weapons which he can easily use to fully take control over our country, eliminating all opposition. We all struggle with the normalcy bias right now. Even if you believe everything I'm saying is true, the normalcy bias is likely working inside of your head. The normalcy bias is a psychological state people enter into when they are faced with a slow but impending crisis that could shatter their lives. This bias causes people to tell themselves that since nothing this bad has ever happened to them before, that it won't happen now. It's a bias that we have towards keeping things normal and happy, as we refuse to allow ourselves to think about bad events which threaten our existence. This state of mind is one of wishful thinking. It causes people ignore the obvious signs of any approaching disaster, to underestimate or minimize its risks in their minds, until it's too late. To understand this natural defensive mechanism better, let's mention some classic examples of the normalcy bias in past history. When the Titanic sank, many of the passengers at first hesitated to get into the lifeboats, feeling they would be safer on board that doomed liner. Wrong. Before the Nazis took power in the 1930s, there were 500,000 Jews in Germany. When the anti-Semitic persecutions began, 100,000 Jews were wise enough to flee the country. Unfortunately, for all the rest, the normalcy bias kicked in and they assumed the situation couldn't get any worse. Of course, the destruction of America is not a guarantee that the end of the world is right around the corner.